The altimeter was spinning backward. Engine oil streaked across the windscreen like black tears. Vanessa Chun gripped the stick with hands that had never been steadier, even as her F-16 screamed toward the Nevada desert at 300 miles per hour upside down. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Behind her, 7 aircraft burned holes in the sky, their pilots. Unconscious, their planes locked on autopilot toward certain death. She had maybe 90 seconds to pull off something that had never been attempted in combat aviation history. The same woman they'd mocked in the ready room 6 months ago for asking too many questions was now the only thing standing between her squadron and complete annihilation. The radio crackled with static. Ground control's voice cut through. "Phoenix. Lead, you are inverted and descending. Recommend immediate ejection." Vanessa's thumb hovered over the ejection handle. One squeeze and she'd be safe, floating down under silk while parachutes deployed around her like deadly flowers. But the unconscious pilots behind her would slam into the desert floor in 47 seconds. She pressed the radio instead. "Negative control, I'm bringing them home." 6 months earlier, Lieutenant Vanessa Chun stood in the Nevada sunrise outside Nellis Air Force Base, her flight bag slung over one shoulder and her entire future balanced on the other. The desert air tasted like dust and possibility, but the weight in her stomach felt more like lead than excitement. At 24, she was older than most new pilots arriving at the 65th Aggressor Squadron, while her classmates from the Air Force Academy had been flying combat missions. Vanessa had spent 3 years as a flight engineer, watching other pilots live the dream she'd been chasing since she was 7 years old. Her path to the cockpit had been unconventional, carved through night school, endless studying, and the kind of determination that comes from having to prove yourself twice as hard as everyone else. The 65th Aggressors were legendary. They flew as enemy aircraft in training exercises, pushing American pilots to their limits by replicating foreign tactics and techniques. It was the kind of assignment that could make or break a career, and Vanessa knew she was walking into a squadron that had no patience for weakness. Major Rick Thompson, the squadron commander, barely looked up from his paperwork when she reported to his office. His gray eyes held the kind of weariness that comes from watching too many young pilots wash out. "Chun," he said, pronouncing her name like it left a bad taste. "You're older than most of our new arrivals. What took you so long to get here?" "I was a flight engineer first, sir. I wanted to understand aircraft systems before I tried to fly them." Thompson's laugh was sharp. "Understanding systems is one thing, Chun. Flying against pilots who've been doing this since they could walk is another. The aggressors don't babysit rookies." The squadron ready room was a temple of aviation excellence. Patches covered every inch of wall space. Red flag exercises, NATO deployments, combat missions stretching back decades. The smell of coffee and leather mixed with something indefinable, something that spoke of speed and danger and the kind of brotherhood forged. At 30,000 feet, Captain Jake Martinez was the first to approach her. Tall and lean with the easy confidence of a pilot who'd never met a challenge he couldn't handle, he extended a hand that felt like it could crush granite. "Fresh meat," he announced to the room. "Guys, meet our new rookie." The other pilots looked up from their briefing materials. Captain Sarah Reeves, one of only 3 women in the squadron, offered a nod that was more assessment than greeting. Lieutenant Colonel Dave Morrison, the operations officer, barely acknowledged her presence. Captain Tyler Brooks, the squadron's golden boy with over 200 flight hours in the F-16, actually turned his back. "Don't take it personally," Martinez said, though his grin suggested he was enjoying her discomfort. "We just don't get many flight engineers trying to play with the big boys." "Or girls," he added, glancing at Reeves. Vanessa's first flight was scheduled for Tuesday morning. She spent Monday night studying aircraft performance charts until her eyes burned, memorizing every specification, every limitation, every emergency procedure. The F-16 Fighting Falcon was a different beast then. Anything she'd worked on as an engineer. Single engine, single seat, designed for one purpose: air-to-air combat. There was nowhere to hide in an F-16. No co-pilot to catch your mistakes. No margin for error when you're pulling 9 Gs and your life depends on split-second decisions. Instructor pilot was Captain Lisa Wong, a 15-year veteran with more combat experience than most pilots see in an entire career. Wong had a reputation for being tough but fair, the kind of pilot who demanded excellence but would teach you how to achieve it. "First rule," Wong said as they walked toward the aircraft Tuesday morning. "The F-16 will kill you if you let it. It's unstable by design, computer-controlled, unforgiving of mistakes. Second rule, trust your training, but think faster than your training. Combat happens at the speed of thought, and if you're thinking about what you should be doing, you're already dead." The pre-flight inspection was ritual and religion combined. Vanessa ran her hands over every surface, checked every system, tested every control. Her engineering background served her well here. She understood not just what each component did, but why it mattered, how it connected to everything else. Wong watched without comment, but Vanessa caught the slight nod of approval when she identified a minor hydraulic leak that could have caused problems at altitude. "Not bad for a rookie," Wong admitted as they strapped into the cockpit. But knowing about systems and flying them are two different things. The engine spun up with a sound like controlled thunder. Vanessa felt the vibration through her entire body, felt the aircraft coming alive beneath her hands. This was what she'd dreamed about for 17 years, the moment when machine and pilot became one, when the boundary between human and aircraft dissolved into pure physics and will. Takeoff was smooth. The F-16 leaped off the runway like it was eager to escape gravity, and suddenly they were climbing through 5,000 feet, then 10, then 15. The Nevada desert spread below them like a brown and gold tapestry, the mountains standing sentinel against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. "Your aircraft," Wong said over the intercom. For the next 90 minutes, Vanessa learned what it meant to fly a fighter jet. They practiced basic maneuvers, climbs, descents, turns, rolls. Each movement required precision, timing, an understanding of how the aircraft would respond before you asked it to respond. The F-16 was sensitive, reactive, demanding constant attention and input. It was like dancing with a partner who could kill you if you stepped on their toes. But Vanessa felt something else, something that surprised her. The aircraft felt familiar. Somehow, as if all those years working on flight lines and studying systems had prepared her for this moment in ways she hadn't expected. When Wong called for a barrel roll, Vanessa found herself anticipating the aircraft's response, feeling the G-forces build and subside with an intuitive understanding that usually took months to develop. "Interesting," Wong murmured after they landed. "You fly like you've been doing this for years, not minutes." The debrief was thorough. Wong covered every aspect of the flight, every maneuver, every response. She pointed out areas for improvement, and there were many, but also acknowledged what had gone well. "You have good hands," she concluded. "Natural feel for the aircraft." But that's just the beginning. Flying formation, air-to-air combat, surface attack, those are different challenges entirely. Back in the ready room, the other pilots barely looked up when Vanessa returned from her first flight. Brooks was holding court near the coffee machine, regaling a group of junior officers with stories from his last red flag exercise. His voice carried across the room with practiced authority. "The key to defeating Russian tactics," he was saying, "is understanding their doctrine. They're predictable, systematic. Once you recognize their patterns, they're easy to counter." He glanced at Vanessa with barely concealed disdain. "Of course, that assumes you understand air-to-air combat theory, which isn't exactly covered in flight engineer school. Martinez laughed. Give her time, Brooks. Maybe after a few hundred hours, she'll figure out which end of the missile is the dangerous part. Vanessa felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her expression neutral. She'd dealt with similar attitudes in every technical field she'd entered. The key was proving herself through performance, not words. Her second flight was formation flying. With Martinez as her instructor, 4 aircraft took off in pairs, forming up in tight fingertip formation, 500 feet above the Nevada desert. Flying formation required constant attention maintaining precise position relative to the lead aircraft while monitoring airspeed, altitude, angle of attack. A moment's inattention could result in a mid-air collision that would kill everyone involved. Tighten up, rookie, Martinez called over the radio. You're sucked and tucked like a tourist. Vanessa made the adjustment, sliding her F-16 closer to Martinez's aircraft until their wingtips were separated by less than 10 feet. At 350 miles per hour, the margin for error was measured in inches and milliseconds. Better, Martinez admitted. Now let's see how you handle a tactical break. What followed was 20 minutes of aggressive maneuvering tactical turns, defensive splits, rejoins under simulated combat conditions. Vanessa's engineering background helped her understand the physics involved, but understanding and executing were different challenges. Twice she fell behind the formation during complex maneuvers. Once she nearly collided with Captain Reeves during a defensive split that required splitting the formation in opposite directions to avoid simulated enemy fire. Rookie mistake, Brooks commented during the debrief. Formation flying isn't about individual aircraft performance. It's about anticipating what your wingmen will do before they do it. That takes experience you can't get from textbooks. But Captain Reeves had a different perspective. She recovered well from the near miss, she told Wong after the debrief. Most new pilots panic when things go wrong. Shun stayed calm, made the correction, got back into position. That's harder to teach than basic maneuvering. The days blended into weeks, each flight building on the previous one, adding layers of complexity and challenge. Air-to-air combat maneuvering, surface attack profiles, electronic warfare scenarios. Vanessa threw herself into each challenge with the methodical intensity that had carried her through engineering school and flight training. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But the squadron's attitude toward her remained unchanged. During briefings, her questions were met with eye rolls and heavy sighs. In the air, her radio calls were answered with barely concealed impatience. After flights, her performance was dissected with a harshness that bordered on cruelty. The breaking point came during her 4th week, during a large force exercise that pitted the aggressors against a visiting squadron from Shaw Air Force Base. 12 aircraft total, split into red and blue teams, fighting a complex air-to-air scenario over the Nevada Test and Training Range. Vanessa was assigned as Brooks's wingman, flying as part of the red team representing enemy forces. Their mission was to penetrate blue team defenses and attack a simulated high-value target. Brooks briefed the mission with his usual confidence, outlining tactics that relied on speed, aggression, and precise timing. "Stay close, rookie," told her as they walked to their aircraft. "This isn't training wheels anymore. These Shaw pilots are good, and they're not going to go easy on you just because you're new." The mission started well. Red Team launched on schedule, formed up at 20,000 feet, and began their approach to the target area. Brooks led with tactical precision, using terrain masking and electronic warfare to avoid early detection by blue team fighters. But something felt wrong to Vanessa. The radio chatter from the blue team was too organized, too coordinated. Their defensive positions seemed too perfect, as if they knew exactly where the red team was coming from and when. "Phoenix lead, this is Phoenix 2. she called over the radio, using Brooks's call sign. Request permission to adjust our approach vector. Negative Phoenix 2. Maintain current heading and altitude. Lead, I'm seeing indications that the blue team may have early warning of our approach. Recommend we, Phoenix 2, this is lead. Maintain radio discipline and follow my lead. That's an order. The ambush came 30 seconds later. 4 blue team F-16s dropped out of the sun like hunting hawks. Their radars locked, their simulated weapons armed. Brooks never saw them coming. His aircraft was killed in the first exchange, his systems displaying the electronic simulation of a successful missile engagement. Vanessa found herself alone, outnumbered 4-1, with blue team fighters converging on her position from multiple directions. Standard doctrine called for immediate egress, get out, live to fight another day. But something in her engineering background, some understanding of systems and timing and physics, suggested a different approach. She pulled her F-16 into a vertical climb, bleeding airspeed, using altitude and gravity as tactical weapons. Blue team fighters followed, their superior numbers working against them in the vertical environment. As they climbed, their energy states became mismatched. Their formation integrity broke down. At 15,000 feet, Vanessa reversed course, diving back toward the desert floor with her throttle firewall forward. The F-16 accelerated like a falling stone, passing through the climbing blue team fighters so fast they couldn't adjust their intercept vectors. By the time they realized what had happened, she was below them, behind them, in perfect position to simulate missile shots against 2 of their aircraft. Kill, 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 the exercise controller announced over the radio. Phoenix 2 has valid shots on Viper 3 and Viper 4. The engagement lasted another 10 minutes, with Vanessa using terrain and energy management to avoid the remaining blue team fighters while completing her simulated attack on the target. When the exercise ended, she had achieved her primary mission. Objective and survived against overwhelming odds. The debrief was tense. Brooks sat in the back of the room with his arms crossed, his face flushed with embarrassment. The Shaw pilots, led by their squadron commander, were openly appreciative of Vanessa's tactics. That vertical reversal was textbook, their commander said. Classic energy management, perfect timing. Who taught you that maneuver? Major Thompson answered before Vanessa could speak. Lieutenant Chen is one of our newer pilots, he said, his voice carefully neutral. She's been with us for 4 weeks. The Shaw commander looked surprised. 4 weeks? That was graduate-level tactical flying. Most pilots take years to develop that kind of situational awareness. After the visiting squadron departed, the aggressor-ready room was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of aircraft on the flight line. Brooks finally spoke, his voice tight with anger. You got lucky, rookie. That vertical reversal was a desperation move, not tactical brilliance. Against experienced pilots, you would have been dead before you reached 10,000 feet. Captain. Reeves looked up from her mission planning materials. She completed the mission, Tyler, and she survived when you got shot down in the first 30 seconds. I got shot down because the rookie didn't follow orders. If she had maintained formation discipline, Martinez interrupted, you both would have been killed. Her warning about blue team positioning was accurate. You chose not to listen. The argument might have continued, but Major Thompson entered the ready room with an expression that shut down all conversation. Chun, he said, I need to see you. In my office. Vanessa followed him down the corridor, her mind racing through everything that had gone wrong during the mission. Had she violated some regulation? Broken some unwritten rule about challenging senior pilots? Thompson closed his door and gestured for her to sit. For a long moment, he studied her with those gray eyes that had seen too much. That was interesting. Flying today, he finally said. Sir, if I made any mistakes during the mission, mistakes? Thompson's eyebrows rose. Chun, you just pulled off one of the most innovative tactical maneuvers I've seen in 20 years of fighter aviation. The question is, where did you learn it? Vanessa hesitated. I didn't learn it anywhere, sir. It just seemed like the right response to the tactical situation. Just seemed like the right response. Thompson leaned back in his chair. Do you understand what you did out there? You used vertical maneuvering to defeat multiple attackers, managed your energy state to maintain combat effectiveness, and completed your mission against overwhelming odds. That's not beginner's luck, Chun. That's tactical intuition that usually takes years to develop. I think my engineering background helps, sir. Understanding aircraft systems, performance limitations, the physics of flight, it all connects to tactical employment. Maybe. Thompson stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the flight line where F-16s sat like sleeping predators. In the Nevada heat. I'm recommending you for accelerated training. Advanced tactical courses, combat maneuvering instruction, leadership development. The aggressors need pilots who can think outside conventional doctrine. Vanessa felt a surge of hope mixed with apprehension. What about the rest of the squadron, sir? I don't think they're ready to accept, Chun, Thompson interrupted, turning back to face her. Acceptance isn't something you wait for. It's something you earn. Today was a good start, but it was just a start. The real challenges are still ahead. As she walked back to the ready room, Vanessa realized that everything was about to change. The rookie period was ending, and what came next would test not just her flying skills, but her ability to lead, to innovate, to push the boundaries of what fighter aviation could become. She had no idea that in less than 2 months, those skills would be the only thing standing between her. Squadron and disaster. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly beyond the base perimeter, holding secrets in its silence, waiting for the moment when theory would become reality, when all the training and preparation and doubt would crystallize into a single, impossible decision that would define not just her career, but her understanding of what it meant to fly, to fight, and to bring everyone home alive. The classified briefing. Rooms smelled like stale coffee and secrets. 6 weeks after her breakthrough performance against the Shaw Squadron, Vanessa found herself seated at a mahogany table surrounded by officers whose ranks carried enough stars to form a constellation. The walls were lined with maps of regions she couldn't identify, marked with symbols that spoke of operations that didn't officially exist. General Patricia Hawkins, commander of the Air Warfare Center, stood at the head of the table. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes held the kind of steel that comes from making life and death decisions for 30 years. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, what I'm about to share with you is classified at the highest levels. The information in this room doesn't leave this room. Vanessa glanced around the table. Major Thompson sat to her right, his expression unreadable. Captain Martinez occupied the chair across from her, his usual confidence replaced by nervous tension. The other faces belonged to squadron commanders from across the base, pilots whose experience dwarfed her own. 3 months ago, General Hawkins continued, our intelligence assets identified a new threat emerging from overseas operations. A weapons system that could fundamentally alter the balance of air superiority. She pressed a button on a remote control, and the wall-mounted display showed satellite imagery of a desert installation that could have been anywhere in the world. The facility looked innocuous enough: a few buildings, some antenna arrays, a single runway. But Vanessa's engineering eye caught details that others might miss. The unusual configuration of the antenna systems, the hardened aircraft shelters, the electromagnetic shielding around the main building complex. Electronic warfare, she said. Quietly, then realized she'd spoken aloud. General Hawkins nodded. That's correct, Lieutenant Chun. This facility houses the most advanced jamming and spoofing technology we've ever encountered. During recent exercises, Allied forces have reported complete loss of GPS navigation. RADAR malfunction, communication blackouts. Aircraft systems failing in ways that suggest not just jamming, but active system intrusion. Colonel Sandra Mitchell, the base intelligence officer, stood and walked to the display. Her voice carried the precision of someone who dealt in facts, not speculation. The system appears capable of taking control of aircraft electronics remotely. Navigation computers, flight control systems, even weapons targeting. In 3 documented cases, Allied aircraft have been forced to land at hostile airfields because their systems were compromised. A chill ran down Vanessa's spine. As a flight engineer, she understood aircraft systems better than most pilots. The idea of someone else controlling her aircraft from the ground was the stuff of nightmares. How is that possible? She asked. We're not entirely sure, Mitchell admitted. But we believe it exploits vulnerabilities in the data links between aircraft and ground control systems. Once they establish a connection, they can inject malicious code directly into flight computers. General Hawkins resumed control of the briefing, which brings us to why you're all here. We need to test our aircraft and tactics against this technology before we encounter it in actual combat. The 65th aggressors have been selected to participate in a classified exercise designed to replicate these electronic warfare capabilities. Major Thompson leaned forward. Ma'am, what exactly are we being asked to do? You'll be flying against a simulated version of this system. Our technical teams have created electronic warfare equipment that can replicate the effects we've observed. The exercise will test pilot responses, aircraft survivability, and tactical countermeasures. Her gaze settled on Vanessa. Lieutenant Chen, your engineering background makes you particularly valuable for this operation. We need someone who understands both the aircraft systems and the potential vulnerabilities. The meeting continued for another hour, covering operational details, security protocols, and mission parameters. But Vanessa's mind was racing ahead, thinking about aircraft systems, electronic vulnerabilities, the countless ways that modern fighters depended on computer control for basic flight operations. After the briefing, Thompson walked with her toward the hangar where their F-16s waited like sleeping tigers in the desert heat. Nervous? He asked. Excited, Vanessa replied, surprising herself with the honesty. This is the kind of challenge that separates real pilots from people who just happen to know how to fly. Thompson smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him since arriving at Nellis. That's exactly why you're here, Chun. Your unconventional background, your ability to think beyond standard doctrine. We're going to need that kind of innovation. The next 2 weeks were intensive preparation. Vanessa spent her days studying electronic warfare theory, aircraft system vulnerabilities, and emergency procedures for scenarios no pilot had ever encountered. She worked with the base's technical teams, helping them understand how electronic intrusion might affect flight controls, navigation systems, weapons targeting. Captain Lisa Wong became her primary instructor for the specialized training. The key, Wong explained as they reviewed system diagrams, is understanding the difference between jamming and spoofing. Jamming blocks your system, so you know something's wrong. Spoofing feeds your system's false information, and you don't realize you've been compromised until it's too late. They practiced scenarios in the simulator first. Navigation systems that provided false position data. Radar displays that showed phantom targets. Communication systems that relayed incorrect instructions from ground control. Each simulation was designed to test pilot responses to electronic deception. The human brain wants to trust instruments, Wong said after a particularly challenging simulator session. We're trained from the beginning to rely on our displays, our computers, our data links. Fighting against that instinct requires a completely different mindset. Vanessa found herself thinking about her grandmother, who had been a pilot in the early days of aviation when instruments were basic and flying was more art than science. What did pilots do before all the electronic systems? She asked. They flew by feel, Wang replied. Airspeed by sound, altitude by pressure, navigation by landmarks. It was dangerous, but it was also pure. No computers to fail, no data links. To compromise, just pilot, aircraft, and physics. The insight sparked something in Vanessa's mind. Modern pilots were trained to manage systems, not to fly without them. But what if the systems were compromised? What if the only way to survive was to disconnect from the electronic environment entirely and fly the aircraft manually? She spent the next week researching manual flight techniques, studying aerodynamics textbooks, practicing instrument-free flying in the simulator. The other pilots thought she was wasting her time. You can't fly a modern fighter without computers, Brooks argued during a ready room discussion. The F-16 is unstable by design. It requires constant computer input just to maintain level flight. Disconnect the flight control computer and you'll be dead in 30 seconds. Maybe, Vanessa replied. But what if the computer is lying to you? What if it's being controlled by someone else? Would you rather die in 30 seconds flying manually, or die in 60 seconds because your aircraft is following someone else's commands? The debate continued, but Vanessa noticed that Captain Reeves was listening intently. After the discussion ended, Reeves approached her at the coffee machine. You might be onto something, Reeves said quietly. I flew with an old-timer once who could land an F-16 with all the instruments covered. Said it was about feeling the aircraft, understanding its natural responses. Most pilots today couldn't do that. Would you be willing to practice with me? Vanessa asked. Manual flying techniques, instrument-free navigation? Reeves grinned. Why not? Might be fun to fly like the old days. They started with basic maneuvers, straight and level flight. Gentle turns, climbs, and descents, all performed without reference to instruments. It was surprisingly difficult. Modern pilots were accustomed to precise numerical feedback, airspeed indicators, altitude displays, heading references. Flying without them required developing an intuitive feel for the aircrafts behavior. Vanessa discovered that her engineering background helped in unexpected ways. Understanding the physics of flight, the relationship between power and performance, the way air moved over control surfaces, all of it contributed to a deeper awareness of what the aircraft was doing and why that word of their unconventional training reached Major Thompson, who observed one of their practice sessions from the ground. Afterward, he called Vanessa into his office. That was interesting flying, he said. Remind me why you're practicing Stone Age techniques in a fourth-generation fighter. Because if the electronic warfare system can control our computers, maybe. The only way to win is to not use computers, she replied. Thompson was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the Nevada mountains. You know, he said finally, there's something to be said for old-fashioned piloting skills. During the Vietnam War, pilots who survived were the ones who could fly by instinct, who didn't depend entirely on technology. Are you saying I should continue the manual flying practice? I'm saying that when we face this new threat in 3 days, having multiple options available might be the difference between success and failure. He turned back to her. But Chun, don't get so focused on manual flying that you forget about modern tactics. The enemy will be using 21st century weapons. We need to beat them with 21st century thinking, even if we're using 20th century techniques. The classified exercise began on a Tuesday morning that dawned clear and cold over the Nevada desert. 8 aggressor F-16s sat on the flight line, their pilots completing pre-flight inspections under the watchful eyes of technical specialists and intelligence officers. Vanessa ran her hands over her aircraft surfaces, checking for anything unusual. The F-16 looked normal, but she knew that somewhere in its electronic systems, vulnerabilities waited to be exploited. Today's exercise would test whether months of preparation could overcome an enemy that fought with electrons instead of explosives. Mission briefing was comprehensive. Blue Team, the aggressors would attempt to penetrate simulated enemy airspace and attack a high-value target. The Red Team, a combination of ground-based electronic warfare systems and opposing aircraft, would attempt to stop them using the advanced jamming and spoofing technology. Remember, Major Thompson told his pilots, this isn't just about completing the mission. We're gathering intelligence on how these systems work, how they affect our aircraft, and what countermeasures might be effective. Expect the unexpected and be prepared to adapt. Captain Martinez led the first flight of 4 aircraft, with Vanessa flying as his wingman. Captain Reeves led the second flight, providing backup and additional tactical options. As they taxied toward the runway, Vanessa felt the familiar pre-flight mixture of excitement and apprehension. The takeoff was normal. 4 F-16s lifted off in pairs, formed up at 5,000 feet, and began their approach toward the target area 50 miles north of Nellis. Radio communications were clear, navigation systems showed accurate position data, radar displays presented a normal picture of the surrounding airspace. Then, at exactly 15 minutes into the mission, everything changed. Vanessa's navigation display suddenly showed her aircraft over the Pacific Ocean, 200 miles west of her actual position. Her radio picked up communications from aircraft that shouldn't have been anywhere near Nevada. Her radar screen filled with contacts that couldn't possibly exist. "Phoenix lead, this is Phoenix 2, she called over the radio. "I'm showing anomalous navigation and radar data. Roger, Phoenix 2, same here. All aircraft maintain visual formation and continue the mission." But maintaining visual formation became impossible when her aircraft's autopilot engaged without authorization and began turning her away from the flight. Vanessa grabbed the control stick, fighting against the computer-controlled flight surfaces that were trying to execute commands she hadn't given. "Phoenix lead, my aircraft is maneuvering independently. I've lost control of navigation and flight control systems." "Copy, Phoenix 2. Try manual reversion." Vanessa reached for the manual reversion switch that would disconnect the flight control computer and give her direct control of the aircraft. But when she flipped the switch, nothing happened. The electronic warfare system had somehow prevented the manual override from functioning. Her F-16 continued its uncommanded turn, accelerating toward a heading that would take her away from the target area and toward the restricted airspace surrounding Area 51. If she crossed that boundary, the exercise would end and she would face serious consequences for violating one of the most sensitive military installations in the world. "Phoenix lead, I'm being vectored toward restricted airspace. Estimate boundary penetration in 90 seconds. Martinez's voice carried new urgency. "Phoenix 2, recommend immediate ejection." But ejection would mean abandoning the aircraft to crash in the desert, destroying a $40 million fighter and potentially causing casualties on the ground. More importantly, it would mean giving up, admitting that the electronic warfare system was superior to human skill and determination. Vanessa made a decision that would have horrified her instructors at flight school. She reached for the circuit breakers that controlled the flight control computer and began pulling them one by one, manually disconnecting the electronic systems that controlled her aircraft. The F-16 lurched as computer-controlled stability gave way to natural aerodynamic forces. Without electronic assistance, the aircraft became unstable, requiring constant pilot input to maintain controlled flight. But it was her input now, not commands from a hostile electronic warfare system. She felt the aircraft respond to her touch. On the controls, felt the way it wanted to move through the air when human hands guided its flight path. It was like the difference between riding in a car and walking, more direct, more immediate, requiring more skill, but offering more control. "Phoenix 2 has reverted to manual flight," she called over the radio. I have aircraft control and am turning back toward the target. Copy Phoenix 2. Be advised, manual flight in the F-16 is extremely dangerous. Recommend you return to base immediately. But Vanessa was discovering something that contradicted everything she'd been taught about modern fighter aircraft. Yes, the F-16 was unstable without computer assistance. But it was also more responsive, more immediate in its reactions. Flying it manually was like the difference between playing a video game and playing a sport more demanding, but also more rewarding. She rejoined the formation just as the second wave of electronic attacks began. This time, the enemy system didn't just spoof navigation data. It began issuing false radio communications that sounded like legitimate ground control instructions. All Phoenix aircraft, this is Nellis Control, came a voice that sounded exactly like their usual ground controller. Abort the current mission and return to base immediately. We have aircraft in distress and need to clear the airspace. Martinez hesitated, clearly uncertain whether the communication was legitimate. In that moment of hesitation, Vanessa realized something crucial. While her aircraft systems had been compromised, her ability to think, to analyze, to make decisions remained intact. Phoenix Lead, recommend we continue the mission, she transmitted. The communication pattern doesn't match normal procedures. Explain Phoenix 2. Ground control would have used authentication codes for a mission abort. They would have specified the nature of the aircraft emergency. And they would have directed us to specific altitudes and headings for deconfliction. Her engineering background had taught her to think systematically, to analyze procedures for logical consistency. Martinez made the call. Roger, Phoenix 2. All aircraft continue their mission. Disregard previous communication. The decision proved correct when the false ground control instructions became increasingly urgent and illogical, clearly attempting to manipulate the flight into abandoning their mission. But the electronic warfare system had one more surprise waiting for them. As they approached the target area, Vanessa's aircraft suddenly pitched nose down into an uncommanded dive toward the desert floor. The flight control computer, which she thought she had disconnected, was somehow still receiving and executing hostile commands. She pulled back on the stick, but the aircraft continued its dive. The circuit breakers she had pulled apparently hadn't severed all connections to the compromised flight control system. At their current rate of descent, she had perhaps 30 seconds before impact with the ground. This was the moment that would define not just the exercise, but her understanding of what it meant to be a pilot in an age of electronic warfare. She could eject the safe choice, the predictable choice, or she could attempt something that had never been tried. Something that would either save her aircraft or kill her in the attempt. Vanessa reached for the master electrical switch and turned off all power to her aircraft's electronic systems. The F-16 went dark, navigation displays went blank, radio went silent. Even the heads-up display that projected flight information onto her windscreen disappeared. She was flying a $40 million fighter jet with nothing but her eyes, her hands, and 17 years of dreaming about this moment, but she was flying it. The uncommanded dive stopped the instant she cut electrical power. The aircraft was hers again, responding to her control inputs without electronic interference. It was unstable, demanding, unforgiving, but it was honest. Flying without instruments required skills that most modern pilots never developed. She had to judge airspeed by engine sound and control feel, altitude by visual reference to the ground, heading by the position of the sun and the landmarks she recognized from countless training flights over the Nevada desert. It was the purest form of flying imaginable, and it was working. With electrical power restored briefly to allow radio communication, she reported her status. Phoenix Lead, this is Phoenix 2. I have aircraft control and am proceeding to target. Phoenix 2, how are you navigating without instruments? Visual flight rules, sir. just like the old days. What followed was one of the most unconventional attack runs in the history of military aviation. Flying entirely by visual reference, using dead reckoning navigation and manual bombing calculations, Vanessa completed her attack on the simulated target while her wingman struggled with compromised electronic systems. After landing, the debrief lasted 4 hours. Intelligence officers, technical specialists, and senior commanders analyzed every aspect of the mission, focusing particularly on Vanessa's manual flight techniques and their effectiveness against electronic warfare. General Hawkins herself attended the debrief, listening intently as Vanessa described her decision to disconnect the aircraft's electrical systems. "And you were able to maintain controlled flight?" the general asked. "Yes, ma'am. The F-16 is unstable by design, but it's controllable. If you understand its aerodynamic characteristics, it actually becomes more responsive without computer assistance, just less forgiving of mistakes. This has significant implications," Colonel Mitchell observed. "If our pilots can learn to fly manually, it provides an option when electronic systems are compromised." But it was Major Thompson who asked the crucial question. "Chun, what would you do if you had to perform a similar manual flight operation with other aircraft depending on you? What if you had to lead a formation through hostile electronic warfare while flying without instruments?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Vanessa thought about formation flying, about the trust between pilots, about the responsibility of leadership in combat aviation. "I'd bring them home, sir," she said simply, whatever it took. She had no way of knowing that in less than 6 weeks, those words would be tested under circumstances that would push the boundaries of human skill and aircraft performance beyond anything ever attempted in the history of military aviation. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly beyond the debriefing room windows, holding its secrets in the silence. Waiting for the moment when theory would become desperate reality, the call came at 0347 hours on a Wednesday morning that started like any other in the Nevada desert. Vanessa's phone buzzed against the nightstand in her base quarters, dragging her from dreams of inverted flight and impossible maneuvers. The voice on the other end belonged to Captain Rodriguez from the 24th Intelligence Squadron, and his words carried the kind of urgency that meant someone's world was about to change forever. "Lieutenant Chen, report to Building 1847 immediately. Bring your flight gear. This is Priority Alpha." Building 1847 didn't officially exist on any base map. Nestled between 2 maintenance hangars on the south side of Nellis, it looked like surplus storage from the outside. But Vanessa knew better. 3 months of working classified programs had taught her that the most important facilities were often the most unremarkable. The interior was a different world entirely. Banks of computer monitors lined the walls, displaying satellite imagery, communication intercepts, and data streams from sources she couldn't identify. Technical specialists in civilian clothes worked alongside military personnel, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of classified information that changed by the minute. Colonel Mitchell stood at the center of it all, surrounded by officers whose rank insignia suggested this was far more serious than a routine exercise. Her usually composed expression showed cracks of concern that made Vanessa's stomach tighten with apprehension. "Chun," Mitchell said without preamble, "we have a situation developing in real time. What I'm about to show you is classified above your current clearance level, but circumstances require your immediate involvement." The main display screen shifted to show satellite imagery of a region Vanessa didn't recognize. Desert terrain, but different from Nevada, more mountainous, with geological formations that suggested somewhere in the Middle East. A cluster of buildings occupied the center of the image, connected by roads that formed a perfect geometric pattern. "This facility," Mitchell continued, "houses the electronic warfare system we've been training against. Intelligence indicates they're preparing to test it against actual American aircraft operating in the region. Captain David Kim from the Cyber Warfare Division stepped forward, his laptop connected to the main display. 47 minutes ago, our monitoring stations detected a massive increase in electromagnetic emissions from the facility. They're powering up systems we've never seen before, broadcast power levels that suggest they're preparing to target aircraft at extended range. The implications hit Vanessa like a physical blow. How extended? Conservative estimate, 300 miles. Possibly more. Kim's fingers flew across his keyboard, bringing up a tactical display that showed aircraft positions across a swath of airspace larger than most states. Red triangles marked friendly aircraft reconnaissance platforms, transport planes, fighters, on routine patrol. All of them potentially vulnerable to a system that could reach farther than anyone had imagined. The problem, Mitchell explained, is that we can't warn them without revealing our intelligence capabilities. The enemy doesn't know we're monitoring their facility. If we suddenly vector all aircraft away from the area, they'll realize we've compromised their communications and moved the entire operation somewhere we can't track it. General Patricia Hawkins entered the room with the kind of purposeful stride that suggested critical decisions were about to be made. Her aide carried a briefcase that probably contained launch codes or their equivalent. What's our current assessment? Colonel? Ma'am, the system will be fully operational in approximately 90 minutes. We have 17 aircraft currently in the potential engagement zone, including a formation of F-22 Raptors, conducting a classified reconnaissance mission. If the enemy activates their system at full power, those aircraft could be compromised or lost. Hawkins studied the tactical display with the concentration of someone who had spent 3 decades making impossible decisions. Options? We could launch an immediate strike against the facility, suggested Colonel James Patterson from the 99th Strike Wing. Eliminate the threat before it becomes operational. Negative, Kim interjected. Our analysis indicates the system is hardened against CONVENTIONEL attack. They've spent years building electromagnetic shielding and redundant power systems. A successful strike would require weapons we're not authorized to use in this region. What about evacuation? Asked Major Thompson, who had arrived sometime during the briefing. Order all aircraft to exit the area immediately. We considered that, Mitchell replied. But the F-22 formation is conducting time-sensitive intelligence gathering. Aborting their mission would compromise operations we've been planning for 18 months. Vanessa listened to the debate with growing unease. Military planning often involved difficult choices, but this felt different. The options being discussed all carried unacceptable costs, either risking aircraft and crews to an untested threat, or sacrificing critical intelligence operations to avoid that risk. Ma'am, she said, surprising herself by speaking up in a room full of senior officers. What if there's a third option? General Hawkins turned her attention to Vanessa with the kind of focus that felt like standing in a spotlight. Explain, Lieutenant. The electronic warfare system is designed to exploit our dependence on computer-controlled flight systems. But if pilots could fly manually, without electronic assistance, they might be able to operate in the affected area without being compromised. Colonel Patterson looked skeptical. Shun, modern fighters can't operate effectively without computer assistance. The mission profiles these aircraft are flying require GPS navigation, digital communication, and integrated sensor systems. Manual flight might keep them airborne, but it won't complete their missions. Not necessarily, sir. Vanessa walked to the tactical display, her engineering background helping her visualize the problem in 3 dimensions. The F-22 formation is conducting reconnaissance, which means they need to reach specific locations and gather information. If they can navigate visually and maintain communication through predetermined signals, they could complete their mission even with electronic systems compromised. Visual navigation? Kim shook his head. Lieutenant, These aircraft are operating at high altitude over unfamiliar terrain. There are no landmarks for visual reference. There are stars, Vanessa replied. Celestial navigation worked for centuries before GPS existed. The principles haven't changed. The room fell silent as senior officers processed the implications of using 19th century navigation techniques with 21st century aircraft. It was either brilliant or insane, and possibly both. General Hawkins broke the silence. Chun, are you suggesting we send pilots into a hostile electronic warfare environment with nothing but celestial navigation and hand signals? I'm suggesting we give them the option, ma'am. If they encounter electronic interference, they can disconnect their computer systems and continue the mission manually. If the interference is minimal, they can use their normal systems. Either way, they maintain the capability to complete their objectives. Major Thompson stepped forward. Lieutenant Chun has been developing manual flight techniques for the past 6 weeks. She's demonstrated the ability to fly complex missions without electronic assistance. If anyone could train pilots for this kind of operation, it's her. Hawkins consulted her watch, calculating time remaining before the enemy system became operational. How long would this training take for basic manual flight? 4 hours minimum, Vanessa replied. For the kind of precision navigation required. For this mission, 12 to 16 hours. We don't have 12 hours, Lieutenant. We have 90 minutes before that system goes active, and our aircraft are already airborne. The impossibility of the situation settled over the room like fog. There was no time for training, no opportunity to test theoretical solutions, no margin for error when lives and national security hung in the balance. Vanessa felt something crystallize. In her mind, a crazy, dangerous idea that violated every principle of safe aviation, but might be the only solution to an impossible problem. Ma'am, she said carefully, what if I flew an escort for the F-22 formation? Provided real-time guidance for manual flight operations if their systems were compromised? Absolutely not, Patterson interjected. You're talking about inserting an inexperienced pilot into a hostile environment during an active electronic warfare operation. The risk is unacceptable. With respect, sir, I'm the only pilot here who has successfully operated in that environment. I've flown manual navigation missions against the same type of electronic warfare system. If our F-22 pilots encounter interference, I can guide them through manual flight procedures while they complete their mission. General Hawkins studied Vanessa with the intensity of someone evaluating a weapon system. Chun, you understand that. This would not be a training exercise. If that electronic warfare system activates while you're in the air, you could face technology more advanced than anything we've tested against. There would be no safety net, no controlled environment, no opportunity to abort if things go wrong. I understand, ma'am. And you understand that the F-22 formation you'd be escorting represents some of our most advanced aircraft and experienced pilots. If your guidance proves inadequate, if your manual flight techniques fail under actual combat conditions, could be responsible for the loss of aircraft and crews worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I understand that too, ma'am. Hawkins was quiet for a long moment, weighing risks and benefits with the calculating precision of a career military officer. Around the room, staff officers exchanged glances that spoke of scenarios being calculated, contingencies being planned, careers being made or destroyed by the next few words. Colonel Mitchell, the general said finally, what's the current status of the F-22 formation? They're approximately 2 hours from their target area, ma'am. Operating under radio silence, following a predetermined flight plan. They're not aware of the electronic warfare threat. Time to intercept? Major Thompson consulted his tablet. If Lieutenant Chun launches immediately, she can rendezvous with the F-22s approximately 40 minutes before they enter the potential threat zone. Enough time to brief them on manual flight procedures? Possibly, ma'am. assuming standard communication protocols and abbreviated instruction. Hawkins made her decision with the kind of finality that shaped history. Chun, you're authorized for immediate launch. Your mission is to intercept the F-22 formation, brief them on potential electronic warfare threats, and provide guidance for manual flight operations if required. Rules of engagement are defensive only. Your job is to get our aircraft home safely, not to engage hostile forces. The next 20 minutes blurred together in a rush of preparation that felt like controlled chaos. Vanessa suited up in the same flight gear she'd worn for routine training flights, but nothing about this mission was routine. Intelligence officers briefed her on enemy capabilities. Communications specialists provided emergency radio frequencies, and weapons technicians loaded her F-16 with defensive systems. She hoped she'd never need to use. Captain Lisa Wong appeared at her aircraft as she completed the pre-flight inspection. "Chun," she said, her voice carrying years of combat experience, "I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this is your chance to prove yourself, to show everyone that the rookie can handle the big leagues. That's not what I'm thinking." Vanessa replied, checking control surface movement with methodical precision. "What are you thinking?" Vanessa paused, her hands resting on the aircraft's wing. The metal was warm from the Nevada sun, solid and real beneath her fingers. "I'm thinking that somewhere out there, American pilots are flying into danger they don't know exists. And I'm thinking that my job is to make sure they come home." Wong nodded slowly. "That's the right answer. Remember your training, trust your instincts, and don't try to be a hero. Heroes get people killed. Professionals bring everyone home alive." The engine start sequence felt different this time. Each switch, each system check, each radio call carried weight that routine flights never possessed. This wasn't training, wasn't practice, wasn't preparation for something that might happen someday. This was the real thing, the moment when all the theory and all the preparation would be tested against an enemy that didn't follow the rules. "Phoenix 7, you are cleared for takeoff," came the voice of ground control, using the call sign assigned for this special mission. Godspeed. The F-16 lifted off into the Nevada morning with a sense of purpose that transcended routine flight. Operations. As Vanessa climbed through 10,000 feet, then 20, then 30, she felt the familiar transformation that occurred when pilot and aircraft became one entity, moving through three-dimensional space. But this time was different. This time, she carried the responsibility for other pilots' lives, for the success of a mission that could affect national security, for proving that unconventional thinking could overcome advanced technology. The intercept point was 200 miles northeast of Nellis, over terrain that looked like the surface of Mars from 35,000 feet. Red rock formations, deep canyons, endless expanses of desert that could swallow aircraft without leaving a trace. It was beautiful and deadly, the kind of landscape that demanded respect from anyone bold enough to fly over it. Her radar picked up the F-22 formation at maximum detection range for aircraft flying in loose combat spread, maintaining communication. Silence as they approached their classified objective. The Raptors were nearly invisible to most detection systems, but Vanessa's F-16 radar was specifically calibrated to work with friendly stealth aircraft. "Ghost Rider flight, this is Phoenix 7, she transmitted on the encrypted frequency provided. During her briefing, "Request permission to join your formation for tactical coordination." The response came from Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez, the F-22 flight leader whose voice carried the confidence of someone who had flown combat missions over 3 continents. "Phoenix 7, Ghost Rider lead, state your mission and authorization." Ghost Rider lead, "I'm authorized by General Hawkins to brief you on potential electronic warfare threats and provide guidance for manual flight operations if required." A pause, then, "Phoenix 7, say again your last transmission." Vanessa repeated the message, adding authentication codes that confirmed her authorization came from the highest levels of command. The fact that a junior lieutenant was being inserted into a classified F-22 mission at the last minute probably violated several operational procedures, but circumstances had moved beyond normal protocols. Roger, Phoenix 7, join on my left wing for a briefing. The next 30 minutes tested Vanessa's ability to communicate complex, technical concepts over tactical radio while flying formation with aircraft that represented the pinnacle of American air superiority technology. She explained the electronic warfare threat, the potential for system compromise, and the basics of manual flight techniques that could keep them airborne if their computers failed. Phoenix 7, came the voice of Captain David Chun, one of the Raptor pilots. Are you seriously suggesting we navigate by looking at stars? Affirmative, Ghost Rider 3, celestial navigation combined with dead reckoning and visual landmark recognition. It's not ideal, but it works when electronic systems are compromised. And if we lose communication? Hand signals for basic maneuvering, predetermined rendezvous points for regrouping, and emergency procedures that don't require radio coordination. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez's voice carried new respect. Phoenix 7, where did you learn these techniques? Trial and error, ma'am. Mostly in error. The briefing concluded just as they approached the edge of the potential electronic warfare zone. Vanessa checked her watch. 37 minutes until the enemy system was scheduled to reach full operational status. If the intelligence estimates were correct, they were flying into electromagnetic territory that no American pilot had ever experienced. All aircraft, Martinez announced, maintain close formation and be prepared for electronic interference. Phoenix 7 will provide guidance if normal systems are compromised. Vanessa felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like lead armor. 4 of the world's most advanced fighter aircraft, piloted by some of America's best aviators, were depending on her ability to navigate through hostile, electronic warfare using techniques that predated the invention of the radio. She had trained for this moment, prepared for this challenge, dreamed of this opportunity to prove that human skill could overcome technological superiority. But as they crossed into potentially hostile airspace, she realized that all the training in the world couldn't prepare someone for the moment when other people's lives depended on their performance. The desert stretched endlessly below them, holding secrets in its silence, waiting for the moment when theory would become desperate reality, when the rookie pilot would discover whether her unconventional ideas could save not just her own life, but the lives of pilots whose experience dwarfed her own. In 18 minutes, the electronic warfare system would reach full power. In 18 minutes, Vanessa Chun would learn whether she was a pilot or just someone who happened to know how to fly. The first sign of electronic attack was subtle, a slight flutter in the radio static that most pilots would have dismissed as atmospheric interference. But Vanessa had spent weeks training her ears to recognize the electronic signatures of hostile jamming. And this wasn't natural. Ghost Rider Flight Phoenix 7, she transmitted. Be advised, I'm detecting electromagnetic anomalies. Recommend switching to backup communication frequencies. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez responded immediately. Copy, Phoenix 7. All aircraft switched to TAC 2. But when they changed frequencies, the interference followed them. Whatever was affecting their communications wasn't random. Jamming it was an intelligent system that could track their frequency changes and adapt in real time. Captain David Chun's voice crackled through the static. Ghost Rider Lead, my navigation system is showing position errors. GPS indicates I'm over the Atlantic Ocean. Same here, reported Captain Lisa Park from Ghost Rider 4. All my navigation references are corrupted. Vanessa felt her pulse quicken. The electronic warfare system was more sophisticated than intelligence had suggested. Instead of simply jamming their systems, it was feeding them false information designed to confuse and disorient. Pilots flying on instruments alone would quickly become lost, potentially flying into restricted airspace, or running out of fuel while trying to navigate with compromised data. All aircraft, this is Phoenix 7, she transmitted. Disconnect your navigation systems immediately. We're switching to visual flight rules. Phoenix 7, that's not possible at this altitude, Martinez replied. We're at 35,000 feet with unlimited visibility, but there are no visual landmarks for navigation reference. Vanessa had anticipated this problem. Ghost Rider lead, look up. The sky above them was a pale blue dome punctured by the sun and just barely visible in the daylight, the faint outline of the moon. To most pilots, celestial bodies were just background scenery. But to someone trained in celestial navigation, they were precision instruments that could provide position references accurate to within a few miles. The sun's bearing combined with our known departure time gives us a rough heading reference, Vanessa explained. The moon's position provides confirmation. It's not GPS accurate, but it's better than flying on corrupted data. She pulled out a knee board with pre-calculated celestial navigation tables, something no modern pilot carried anymore, but which she'd prepared specifically for this possibility. The numbers told her they were approximately 15 miles east of their intended course, close enough to the target area to complete the mission. But then the electronic warfare system escalated its attack. Captain Park's voice carried new urgency. My flight control computer is responding to inputs I'm not making. The aircraft is trying to turn away from our heading. Same here, Chun reported. It's like someone else is flying my plane. This was the scenario Vanessa had trained for, the moment when enemy technology attempted to take control of American aircraft. But experiencing it in real combat was different from simulation. The stakes were real, the consequences permanent. All aircraft, prepare for manual flight operations, she transmitted. I'm going to talk you through disconnecting your flight control computers. Phoenix 7, Martinez interrupted. The F-22 cannot fly safely without computer assistance. The aircraft is designed with relaxed stability. It requires constant computer input for basic flight control. Ma'am, you can fly it manually if you understand the control relationships. The computer makes it easier, but it's not impossible without it. What followed was the most intensive flight instruction session in aviation history. While flying in formation at 35,000 feet over hostile territory, with enemy electronic warfare systems actively trying to take control of their aircraft, Vanessa guided 4 F-22 pilots through the process of disconnecting their flight control computers and reverting to manual flight. First, you need to understand that the aircraft will feel different, she explained, her own hands demonstrating the control inputs on her F-16. Without computer assistance, it will require constant small corrections. Don't fight at work. With the aircraft's natural tendencies, Captain Chun was the first to make the transition. Phoenix 7, I've disconnected the flight control computer. The aircraft feels ... alive, like it's trying to tell me something. That's exactly right. Ghost Rider 3, you're feeling the aircraft's natural aerodynamic responses. Trust those sensations. They're more honest than any computer display. One by one, the other F-22 pilots made the transition to manual flight. It was dangerous, demanding, and completely contrary to their training, but it worked. Once they disconnected their compromised computer systems, the electronic warfare attacks became ineffective. The enemy could jam their radios, spoof their navigation, and corrupt their displays. But they couldn't override human hands on flight controls or human eyes reading the sky for navigation references. Phoenix 7, Martinez said, her voice carrying new respect. We're approaching the target area. How do we complete our reconnaissance mission without functioning sensor systems? This was another challenge Vanessa had anticipated. Ma'am, what's your mission requirement? What specific information do you need to gather? We need photographs of the facility from multiple angles. plus electromagnetic spectrum analysis of their communication systems. The photographs you can take manually using backup cameras. The electromagnetic analysis is more complicated, but if you can get close enough to the facility, your sensors will gather data even if the displays aren't working. The information will be recorded for later analysis. It was improvisation at the highest level, adapting sophisticated reconnaissance procedures to function despite electronic warfare interference. Each F-22 pilot became both navigator and sensor operator, using visual cues and manual procedures to complete a mission designed for computer-controlled aircraft. The target facility appeared as a cluster of buildings in the desert, exactly matching the satellite imagery from their pre-flight briefing. But seeing it with their own eyes revealed details that satellite images couldn't capture. The electromagnetic shielding was more extensive than intelligence had indicated. The antenna arrays were larger and more complex, and there were vehicle movements that suggested the facility was more active than expected. All aircraft maintain altitude and begin photo runs, Martinez ordered. Phoenix 7, can you provide navigation guidance for multiple target approaches? Vanessa calculated angles and distances using mental trigonometry, her engineering background allowing her to compute intercept courses without computer assistance. Ghost Rider lead recommends approach from bearing 270, then 2 sequential. Passes from bearing 090 and 180. That should give you comprehensive coverage. The photo runs were textbook perfect. Each F-22 pilot executed their approach with precision that would have been impressive under normal conditions, but was extraordinary given that they were flying manually without electronic navigation aids. The reconnaissance mission that had seemed impossible under electronic warfare conditions was being completed through human skill and determination. But the enemy had one more surprise waiting. As the F-22s completed their final photo pass, Vanessa's threat warning system lit up with indications she'd never seen before. Multiple surface-to-air missile sites were activating, their radars searching for targets. The electronic warfare facility wasn't just defending itself passively, it was part of an integrated air defense system. All aircraft, multiple SAM sites, are active, she transmitted. Recommend immediate egress from the target area. But egress proved more complicated than approach. The missile sites were positioned to create overlapping fields of fire that covered all the obvious escape routes. Flying manually without electronic countermeasures, the F-22s were vulnerable to surface-to-air missiles in ways they'd never experienced. Phoenix 7, Martinez called. What's our best route out of here? Vanessa studied the tactical situation with the analytical skills that had made her an exceptional engineer. The missile sites were positioned to defend against conventional attack profiles, aircraft flying predictable courses at predictable altitudes. But what if they didn't fly predictably? Ghost Rider flight, prepare for unconventional egress procedures. She announced, we're going to use terrain masking and unpredictable flight paths to avoid missile engagement. What followed was flying that pushed the boundaries of what fighter aircraft were designed to do. Instead of climbing to altitude and flying direct routes to safety, Vanessa led the formation through a series of low-altitude maneuvers that used mountain ridges and valleys to mask their radar signatures. Flying F-22s at low altitude through mountainous terrain without computer assistance was extraordinarily dangerous. The margin for error was measured in feet, and a single mistake would result in controlled flight into terrain. But it was also the only way to avoid surface-to-air missiles that were designed to engage high-altitude targets. Stay tight on my wing, Vanessa called as she led them through a canyon that seemed barely wide enough for their wingspans. Trust your peripheral vision and maintain visual contact with the aircraft ahead of you. The canyon walls flashed past at 400 miles per hour, close enough to touch, demanding split-second reflexes and absolute trust in each other's flying ability. But the terrain masking worked. The surface-to-air missile sites lost radar contact as the formation disappeared into the landscape, flying below their minimum engagement altitude. After 20 minutes of the most intense flying any of them had ever experienced, they emerged from the mountain range into clear airspace. The threat warning systems fell silent. The electronic warfare interference faded to manageable levels. They had completed their mission and survived electronic warfare attacks that were designed to be insurmountable. Phoenix 7, Martinez transmitted, her voice carrying exhaustion and gratitude. I don't know how to thank you. That navigation and evasion technique just saved all our lives. Ma'am, that's what wingmen are for. But as they climbed back to cruising altitude for the return flight to base, Vanessa realized that the mission had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. She was no longer the rookie pilot asking too many questions in the ready room. She was no longer the flight engineer trying to prove herself as an aircrew. She was a combat pilot who had led other pilots through hostile airspace, who had adapted to enemy technology in real time, who had brought everyone home alive using skills that existed at the intersection of art and science. The return flight to Nellis took 90 minutes, flying in loose formation with the F-22S while their computer systems slowly came back online as they moved away from the electronic warfare zone. Radio communications cleared, navigation displays began showing accurate information, and the familiar comfort of modern avionics returned. But something fundamental had changed. They had proven that human pilots could overcome technological superiority through skill, training, and the willingness to think beyond conventional doctrine. The electronic warfare threat that had seemed insurmountable had been defeated not by superior technology, but by superior pilots. As they approached Nellis Air Force Base, Vanessa could see the assembled crowd on the flight line. Word of their mission had spread through the intelligence community, and senior officers from multiple commands were waiting to debrief what might have been the most significant air combat development since stealth technology. But all Vanessa could think about was the moment in the canyon when 4 F-22 pilots had trusted her judgment completely, following her through terrain that could have killed them all, believing that her unconventional ideas could keep them alive. She had asked herself 1,000 times whether she was a pilot or just someone who happened to know how to fly. Today had gave her the answer. She was a pilot. And more than that, she was the kind of pilot other pilots would follow into the impossible. 2 months after the electronic warfare mission, Vanessa stood in the same ready room where pilots had once dismissed her as an inexperienced rookie. But everything had changed. The patches on her flight suit now included the Intelligence Excellence Award and the Distinguished Flying Cross. More importantly, when she spoke during mission briefings, veteran pilots listened. Today's exercise was supposed to be routine. Red flag training mission involving multiple squadrons, practicing coordinated air-to-ground attacks. 8 aircraft from the 65th aggressors would play the role of enemy fighters, challenging a strike package of F-35s and F-16s, attempting to reach their simulated targets. Captain Jake Martinez, now her element lead, reviewed the tactical plan with characteristic confidence. Simple intercept mission, he announced. We'll use the Ravens Canyon approach to catch the strike package at their ingress point. Standard BVR engagement, nothing fancy. But Vanessa had studied the meteorological reports and noticed something the others had missed. Jake, did you see the wind shear predictions for the target area? There's a severe weather cell developing that could affect the engagement. The weather's clear, Vanessa. Visibility unlimited, perfect flying conditions. At ground level, yes. But there's a temperature inversion at 15,000 feet that's creating wind shear gradients. If we get into a vertical fight in that area, the atmospheric conditions could be dangerous. Brooks, who had evolved from antagonist to grudging ally, looked up from his mission planning materials. Chun, you're overthinking this. It's a clear day, standard engagement. Save the meteorology lecture for after we shoot. Down some F-35s. The mission launched on schedule, with 8 F-16s climbing into the Nevada morning. Vanessa flew as Martinez's wingman, responsible for supporting his intercepts while maintaining tactical awareness of the overall engagement, the strike package. They were hunting consisted of 12 aircraft approaching from the east, using terrain masking to avoid early detection. The initial intercept developed exactly as planned. The aggressors used superior positioning to engage the incoming strike package at maximum radar range, simulating beyond visual range missile shots that killed 3 F-35s before the merge. It was textbook execution of air superiority tactics. But as the engagement evolved into a close-range dogfight, the atmospheric conditions Vanessa had predicted began to affect aircraft performance. Wind shear at different altitudes created turbulence that disrupted tactical formations. Temperature inversions caused radar anomalies that made target tracking difficult. Phoenix flight, be advised of severe wind shear between 14 and 16,000 feet, Vanessa transmitted. Recommend avoiding vertical maneuvering in that altitude band. The warning came too late for Captain Lisa Park, flying Phoenix. 4. Pursuing an F-35 in a vertical climb. She encountered wind shear that caused her F-16 to depart controlled flight. The aircraft entered an unrecoverable spin, forcing her to eject at 8,000 feet. Phoenix 4 is down, came the transmission from the exercise controller. All aircraft, continue the exercise. But the ejection had occurred in an area where the wind shear was most severe. Park's parachute, designed for normal atmospheric conditions, was being battered by conflicting air currents that threatened to drive her into the rocky terrain below. Phoenix lead, this is Phoenix 2, Vanessa called to Martinez. I'm observing anomalous parachute behavior. Park's chute is being affected by the same wind shear that caused her aircraft to depart. Martinez was engaged with 2 F-35s and couldn't break away to assist. Phoenix 2, maintain your position. Search and rescue will handle the recovery. But Vanessa could see what others couldn't. Park's parachute was oscillating violently, caught between conflicting wind currents that were driving her toward a cliff face. Search and rescue helicopters would take 20 minutes to reach the area, and by then, it would be too late. Phoenix lead, I'm breaking off to assist Phoenix 4. Negative Phoenix 2. Continue the exercise. Vanessa made a decision that violated direct orders but followed a higher calling. She broke formation and dove toward Park's position, watching the parachute's oscillations and calculating wind vectors in three-dimensional space. The atmospheric conditions that were threatening Park's life also created an opportunity. If Vanessa could position her aircraft correctly, she could use her jet wash to create a localized air current that would stabilize the parachute and push Park away from the cliff face. It was a technique that existed only in theory, something pilots discussed in academic settings but never attempted in practice. Using jet wash to influence parachute behavior required precision flying that left no margin for error. A miscalculation would kill both Park and herself. But as Vanessa approached the oscillating parachute, a more serious crisis developed. The same atmospheric conditions that had caused Park to eject were affecting the other aircraft in the exercise. Captain David Chun's F-16 experienced sudden engine failure, followed immediately by Captain Sarah Reeves reporting flight control. Problems. Mayday, mayday, came Chun's voice over the radio. Phoenix 6 has lost engine power and is unable to maintain altitude. Then Reeves, Phoenix 5 has flight control anomalies. I'm losing control authority. Within 30 seconds, 3 more aircraft reported similar problems. The atmospheric conditions weren't just creating wind shear, they were affecting aircraft systems in ways that defied normal meteorology. The entire formation was experiencing simultaneous emergencies that threatened to turn a routine training exercise into a catastrophic loss of multiple aircraft. All Phoenix aircraft, this is Phoenix 2, Vanessa transmitted, abandoning call sign protocol in favor of clear communication. The atmospheric conditions are more severe than predicted. We need to execute emergency recovery procedures immediately. But emergency recovery procedures required functioning aircraft, and half the formation was dealing with system failures that made normal recovery impossible. The pilots were conscious and communicating, but their aircraft were becoming uncontrollable, locked on autopilot courses that would take them into the desert floor. This was the moment from 6 months ago. The impossible scenario where Vanessa would have to attempt something that had never been tried in aviation history. But now she understood why it was happening and what needed to be done. The atmospheric disturbance was creating electromagnetic effects that interfered with aircraft systems, similar to the electronic warfare she had trained against, but generated by natural phenomena instead of enemy technology. The solution required the same techniques she had developed for manual flight operations. All aircraft, this is Phoenix 2, she transmitted. I need you to trust me and follow my instructions exactly. We're going to use manual flight techniques to overcome the system failures. Phoenix 2, we can't maintain controlled flight with these system anomalies, Martinez replied. You can if you disconnect the affected systems and fly manually. I'm going to talk you through it, but I need to do something first. Vanessa rolled her F-16 inverted, positioning herself above the formation of compromised aircraft. Flying upside down provided the perfect vantage point to observe each aircraft's behavior and provide real-time guidance for manual flight recovery. But flying inverted also meant that her own flight controls were reversed, requiring her to think backwards while providing forward guidance to 7 other pilots. It was like conducting an orchestra while playing her instrument in a mirror image. Phoenix lead, reduce power and ease back on the stick, she called to Martinez, whose aircraft was in an uncommanded dive. Trust your airspeed, not your altitude display. One by one, she guided each pilot through the process of disconnecting compromised systems and reverting to manual flight control. Flying inverted gave her the perspective needed to see what each pilot couldn't see from their own cockpit: the relationship between their aircraft's attitude, airspeed, and flight path. Phoenix 6, your engine restart should work now that you're clear of the electromagnetic interference, she told Chun. Phoenix 5, your flight controls will respond normally if you disconnect the autopilot system, she advised Reeves. It was the most complex flight instruction ever attempted, conducted while flying inverted at 300 miles per hour, talking 7 pilots through simultaneous emergency procedures, while maintaining awareness of everyone's position relative to the dangerous atmospheric conditions. The technique worked. Within 10 minutes, all 7 aircraft had regained controlled flight and were climbing away from the atmospheric disturbance that had threatened to destroy them. The formation that had been heading for certain disaster was intact and flying. Home. Phoenix 2, how did you know to fly inverted? Martinez asked as they leveled off at safe altitude. It gave me the best perspective to see everyone's situation simultaneously, Vanessa replied. Sometimes you have to turn the world upside down to see it clearly. After landing, the debrief lasted 6 hours. Meteorologists, accident investigators, and senior commanders analyzed every aspect of the incident, trying to understand how atmospheric conditions had nearly caused the loss of an entire formation. But the focus kept returning to Vanessa's decision to fly inverted while providing emergency guidance. Aviation safety experts called it either genius or insanity, possibly both. What everyone agreed on was that it had saved 7 pilots' lives and prevented the loss of 8. F-16S. General Hawkins attended the final debrief, listening as specialists tried to categorize what had happened. Finally, she turned to Vanessa with a question that would define the rest of her career. Chun, where did you learn to think like that? Vanessa considered the question seriously. "Ma'am, I learned it from the aircraft. Every airplane wants to fly. It's just a matter of understanding what it's trying to tell you." "And the inverted flight technique?" "Sometimes the best way to lead is to see the situation from a different perspective, even if that perspective seems impossible." 6 months later, Vanessa stood in the same ready room, but now she was conducting the mission briefing. The nameplate on her desk read, "Captain Vanessa Chun, Flight Commander." The pilots gathered around her included both rookies learning their first tactical maneuvers and veterans with decades of experience. "Today's mission involves unconventional flight techniques," she announced, her voice carrying the authority. "That comes from proving yourself under impossible circumstances. We're going to practice manual navigation, instrument-free flying, and emergency recovery procedures that don't exist in any manual." Captain Brooks, now one of her most trusted pilots, grinned from the back of the room. "Sounds like a normal day with Chun." As the briefing concluded and pilots headed to their aircraft, Vanessa reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had started as a rookie pilot asking too many questions, someone who others thought didn't belong in a fighter squadron. But she had learned that the best pilots aren't just people who know how to fly. They're people who understand that flying is about more than managing systems and following procedures. Flying is about pushing the boundaries of what's possible, about thinking differently when conventional thinking isn't enough, about bringing everyone home alive, no matter how impossible the circumstances. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly beyond the hangar doors, holding new challenges in its silence, waiting for the next moment when theory would become reality, when the impossible would become just another day at the office for pilots who had learned to see the world from every angle, including upside down. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.